And so what I want to talk about today is what exactly is the theory of intelligent design, and why does it inspire such determined attempts to suppress it and to suppress the advocates of the theory? What is this rival doctrine of which Professor Richard Dawkins was speaking in that opening clip? Well, perhaps the best way to understand the theory of intelligent design is by contrast to the proposition, the key proposition that it has been formulated to challenge. Richard Dawkins is the leading spokesman for modern Darwinian theory, known as neo-Darwinism. And he has put it very succinctly. We appreciate him for his clarity. This is what he says: biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Now we have a teacher desk here for me, so I'm going to play teacher for a minute and give you a quiz. What is the key word in that statement from a neo-Darwinian point of view? Excellent. A's for everyone. Okay, the Darwinian view, and this goes back to Darwin, but it has been the view of Darwinians and modern neo-Darwinians ever since, is the idea that life looks as though it were designed by a purposive intelligence, but it's not really designed. Instead, it's not really designed because there is an unguided, undirected process known as natural selection, acting on random variations, and modern neo-Darwinists would now say random mutations. Natural selection acting on random variations and mutations, which can produce the appearance of design. In other words, it's an unguided natural mechanism that has the powers to mimic, that has the ability to mimic the powers of a designing intelligence, but which itself is not guided or directed or intelligent in any way or form. Okay? So that's the Darwinian view. You have design without a designer. Design without a designer. In fact, that's the title of a very recent article by Francisco Ayala, a leading Darwinian biologist. We have design, the appearance of design, without an actual designer. Now that sounds so counterintuitive to people outside biology that I like to explain the logic of this, because it's really important to feel the force of the Darwinian argument. And this idea of design without a designer goes back to Darwin himself. In fact, it's in the third chapter of The Origin of Species, where he lays out the logic of natural selection as a substitute for an actual designing intelligence. During the 19th century, biologists were very impressed with what seemed to most of them, until Darwin's time, an overwhelming evidence of design. And that evidence was often described as adaptation. No matter what organism you look at, the organism seems to be well adapted to the environment in which it lives. So as a little boy, I was fascinated with fish. On fishing trips, I used to get in trouble for cranking the fish various different ways, but I was fascinated by those swim bladders. You know, they have little balloons that inflate, that keep them at the right buoyancy. It seemed really cool. And you look at a fish, it's got gills that allow it to extract oxygen from the water, it's got a swim bladder, it's got a lateral line, it has all these wonderful adaptations or innovations that allow it to live in the water. And the same thing is true of nearly every organism. And the explanation that seemed overwhelmingly compelling to biologists in the 19th century was that of design. The reason that organisms have the attributes that are necessary to live in a particular environment, in fact, the environment in which they live, is that they were designed to live in that environment. They were given those attributes, those features, those characteristics that they needed. Now, Darwin came along and said, I think actually I can explain adaptation without a designer. Now, and here's how it goes. Let's imagine, well, let me give you one other little piece of background information. One other thing that 19th century biologists knew about very well was what is called selective breeding. In fact, selective breeding has been known and understood from biblical times. You have this way back in the book of Genesis. But the idea of selective breeding was that you can alter the attributes or features of a population of organisms by choosing which males and which females you are going to allow to breed out of a group of animals or offspring. Let's imagine, for example, that we are sheep herders in the far north of Scotland, and we want to breed a woollier breed of sheep. What do? Well, we take the woolliest male and the woolliest ewe, and we allow only them to breed. And then we get a new group, herd of sheep, you get herd of sheep? School? Flock, thank you. I knew there was a technical term out there waiting for me. Okay, so you get a new flock of sheep. Anyway, you get more sheepies. And you pick the woolliest male again, woolliest female, and you do that generation after generation after generation. What do you end up with at the end of that process? Very woolly sheep, okay? And then you can make a lot of nice Scottish sweaters and things, okay? So now, in other words, with the intelligent guidance of the breeder, you could change the attributes of the group of animals. And in this case, change them so that they're very woolly in a very cold climate. So what do you have? You're enhancing the adaptive ability of the sheep to the climate in which they live. Now, this was Darwin's genius. This is where he came along. And he said, well, he didn't use this example, but run with it for a minute. He said, what if instead of the intelligent breeder doing the selecting, what if nature does the selecting? What if instead of me choosing the woolliest males and woolliest females in each generation, there's a series of very cold winters, such that only the woolliest survive in each generation? Won't you get at the end of that process, won't you get the very same outcome? But in this case, in the Darwinian case, you don't have an intelligence guiding it. It's just nature doing the work. The cold winters killing off all but the very woolliest. And that was his idea, that nature could do the selecting. Nature could replace the breeder, or nature could replace the intelligent agent that was responsible for the key evidence of design as perceived by 19th century biologists, which was adaptation. And that's the essence of Darwinism. Now, Darwin was therefore very clear about this. There was people who wanted to say, well, maybe natural selection is a guided or directed process. He says, no, you don't understand. The whole point is that it's natural selection, not intelligent selection. And so he emphatically, in one of the letters that he wrote after the publication of The Origin of Species, made this denial of design very explicit. He said there seems to be no more variability of organic beings in the action of natural selection than in the course in which the wind blows. It is an undirected process. It's nature just doing what nature does. And so the core of Darwinism is this idea that the appearance of design, in 19th century terms, adaptation, has resulted from a purely undirected natural or material process. Most importantly, the process of natural selection acting on random variations, and we would now today talk about mutations as well. Mutations are copying errors in the DNA molecule. Now, that gets us finally to the idea of intelligent design. Intelligent design is the idea that there are key features of living systems that are best explained not by an undirected process such as natural selection and random variations, but instead by an actual designing intelligence. That we see the appearance of design very often because that appearance is indicating an actual design. That things look designed because they really were designed. Living organisms look designed because they really were designed. Now, in saying this, it's important to understand what we're not saying, we advocates of the theory of intelligent design. We are not denying several of the meanings of evolution. Evolution can mean several things. It can mean change over time, first of all. And that itself can have a couple of different meanings. Change over time could refer to the idea that life now, the things that are alive today, the organisms that are alive today are different than some of the organisms that were alive a long time ago. If you go back in the geologic column, lower and lower, in the lower strata, you find fossil remains of organisms and animals that no longer live today. I'll be talking a lot tomorrow about trilobites from the Cambrian period, or triceratopses from the Cretaceous. Advocates of intelligent design are not denying that life has changed over time, nor are we denying that there is change over time that occurs in our present observable timescale. For example, we see the Galapagos finches changing in response to changing weather patterns, beaks getting longer or shorter as a result of changing weather, the kind of small-scale, what biologists often call microevolutionary variation. So intelligent design is not denying that. There's a second meaning of evolution, and intelligent design is not denying this meaning either. This is the idea of universal common descent. And you may remember that part of Darwin's theory was a picture of the history of life, wherein he portrayed the process of evolution beginning from one or very few simple, probably one-celled organisms, and then those organisms gradually morphing and changing so that all the forms of life today are related by common ancestry to forms of life that lived a long time ago. And he depicted the history of life as a great branching tree, where the root or trunk of the tree represented the first life, the branches at the top, all the forms of life we see today, and the branches in the middle, those forms that morphed gradually from that first simple form to what we have today. Now, the theory of intelligent design is not actually challenging this idea, though many advocates of intelligent design, perhaps me in particular, are skeptical of this. I am very profoundly skeptical that this is the right picture of the history of life, but this is not the proposition. Intelligent design is not denying the idea of universal common descent. Instead, it has a different proposition in its crosshairs. We instead are challenging the idea, a third meaning of evolution. The idea that natural selection or other similarly undirected processes are sufficient to account for all the change that might have occurred in the history of life and the appearance of design that living organisms manifest. The Darwinian idea, again, is that the natural selection random mutation process is essentially a very creative process that can produce an unlimited amount of change such that it is the causal agent for all the forms of life we see today. We are challenging that. We don't think that that undirected process can do what the neo-Darwinians say it can do. And we especially don't think that it is responsible for many of the key appearances of design that excite our interest and imagination. And I will talk about some of those things as we proceed. So if we look at the three definitions of evolution, we have the trivial meaning of change over time. Intelligent design is not challenging that. We have a more controversial meaning, universal common descent. And while some advocates of intelligent design may be skeptical of that, that's not really the main thing we're challenging. But the third meaning of evolution is this idea that natural selection is the chief cause of new biological form and the appearance of design, and that proposition we are in fact challenging.